Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this exciting session of International Education Week UNE 2024. We're thrilled to have audiences joining us from Mexico and various parts of the world on StreamYard, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. Thank you for being part of this global gathering. As we dive into today's program, we encourage you to share your thoughts, insights, and takeaways on social media using the hashtag IEW 2024 and hashtag UNETuPotencial. Let's keep the conversation going and connect with others who are inspired by today's event. It's now my pleasure to introduce an extraordinary individual whose work at the intersection of art, leadership, and community building is nothing short of transformative. Felice Bell is the author of Viscera, Etruscan Press 2023, as a poet and playwright. She has performed at the Apollo Theater, Dead Women, and Dead City 2.0. Her writing has been published in several journals and anthologies, including Oral Tradition. The Common and Uncommon Bonds. Women reflect on race and friendship. She is a lecturer in the Law Residency MFA program at St. Francis College in Brooklyn, New York, and the Artist Network Director for the global nonprofit Narrative 4. Today, Felice brings her unique expertise to us with a workshop titled The Art of Leadership, leveraging the creative process for a better world. Creative leaders think outside of the box to find innovative solutions to everyday challenges. In this workshop, we'll explore how creativity and the arts can help us become more effective leaders in any field. Through a series of interactive exercises, we'll investigate how we can use the artist tools of curiosity, imagination, and play to inspire action and drive change at work and beyond. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Felice Bell.
Thank you so much, Fernanda. It's a pleasure to be here. And greetings wherever in the world you are tuning in from. I am in Brooklyn, New York. I'm so excited to be with you today. As Fernanda mentioned, I'm a poet and a playwright, and I work with an organization called Narrative 4, which is an education nonprofit that uses personal stories to help young people create change in their classrooms and communities. So I'm going to jump right into it. And Narrative 4, we like to start with a story. And I was trying to think about how to tell my life story in 3 to 5 minutes. And my best idea was to use photographs. So I'm going to walk you through this presentation of some moments that are really important to me that kind of made me the person that I am today. Starting with this picture here of Guyana, South America. My parents immigrated to the United States in the 60s. My brothers and I were the first ones born here, so we're first generation. So even though I'm American, all of the culture and music and art I grew up with was very much from Guyana. This next picture is something that I drew when I was in kindergarten. They asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said I wanted to be a librarian because librarians were in charge of books, and books were filled with adventure and magic and wonder. And at that age, it didn't occur to me that somebody had to write those books. I just knew she was in charge, and that's what I wanted to do. This next picture is of Peter Pan on Broadway. So when I was young, my parents took us to the theater a lot. And I remember seeing Peter Pan fly across the audience, and I couldn't believe it was happening. And even though I could see the string holding him up, it still felt like magic. And I feel like that started my love affair with the theater. When it came time to go to college, I asked my mom if I could major in theater, and she said absolutely not, because my mom is from the Caribbean. So I was like, you could be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And I chose engineering. I majored in industrial engineering undergrad. But while I was studying engineering, I started writing poetry because it was sort of an emotional outlet for the rigor of my academic career. I also read out loud a poem I'd written for the first time while I was in college. And then that love of theater sort of led to my love of poetry and performing my poetry. So after graduation, I got involved with the New Eurekan Poets Cafe, which is a historic venue on the Lower East Side of New York. I ended up hosting their Friday night slam. That's also where I met my best friend, Jen. And you can see the two of us here in this picture. A couple of years after that, we wrote a 2-woman show, and we had the honor of performing an excerpt of that at a TED conference. Around the same time, I was working at the Brooklyn Public Library. So I didn't ever become a librarian, but I did work at the library. And that's where I first started doing some work with Narrative 4. I was working with adults who are learning to read and write, anywhere from nothing at all up until the 5th grade level. And my students had such great stories. I wanted to find a way to try to share them with the public. So we brought Narrative 4 in to do a story exchange. And then my students did a writing workshop for a few weeks. And then I compiled all of those stories into a script that we ended up performing. We brought in actors to perform it for the public. And that's the picture you see here. And then this last picture is my book of poetry. So I ended up publishing a book of poetry last year. It was a creative highlight of my life. And those are sort of some of the things that have influenced my career as a creative. I want to talk a little bit about my creative process before we get into the interactivity of this workshop, because I'm actually going to be asking you all to do a lot in the chat because I can't see you and I want to know who's in the room. So my creative process is a little messy, meaning I take influence and inspiration from multiple sources. And you'll see that throughout this presentation. Where possible, I will credit where I've gotten different ideas from. But even the title of this workshop, I actually took a piece of it from a workshop I attended in New Zealand a few months ago as part of the International Teaching Artists Collaborative Conference. And so I think artists are always in search of inspiration. I think they draw influence from many different places. There's a well-known essay by Jonathan Latham, who's a fiction writer, called The Ecstasy of Influence. And every line in the essay is taken from another source. And it makes its cohesive piece magically, right? Because I think that's what artists do, is take from different sources and create something new. Another thing that's really important to my creative process is the spirit of inquiry and asking questions. I am somebody who loves Law and Order. I love detective shows, in part because these characters are asking questions to get to the truth. And I think as an artist, questions for me represent an opening, meaning questions lead to more questions. So it's not really about the search for one single answer. It's how deep do we want to dive into the discovery of something new? And then the last thing that's really important in my creative process is the idea of interactivity. So I love being able to share work with an audience. I think there's an alchemy or a magic that happens between a creator and the audience once it's released into the world. So in the spirit of interactivity and inspiration, I'm going to say, let's get creative. So I'm going to ask you all to write a very short poem. And if you are brave, you can share that short poem in the chat. But essentially, it will be 3 lines. The first line is, who are you? That could be your name, right? That's really simple. 1 line done. The next is, what do you do? And the third line is, why do you do what you do? So in addition to working with Narrative 4, I also teach in the creative writing program at St. Francis College in Brooklyn. And I will often, if I'm asking my students to do something, I will do it myself. And so because I'm asking you all to do this, I did it myself. And this activity also came from a workshop that I took at the ITAC conference. And I want to credit those artists that it came from in the chat. I think Patricia and Carrie Ziegler. And so you'll see their information in the chat. So this is my example. My name is Felice. That's the first line. Who am I? I'm a poet and a playwright. That's what I do. And then the why is, I believe words are currency and there's purpose in your story. So that's my example. It rhymes a little bit. Yours does not have to rhyme, but I'm just going to put that slide back up and we're going to take about 5 minutes. So I'll set a timer here. And as you finish, please feel free to add your poem in the chat. And this will just give me an idea of who's in the room. And it'll also give you all an idea of who's in the room. You can get to know your fellow participants for this hour. So I'm going to start the timer now. I'm going to say 5 minutes, but I'm probably only going to give you 3. So heads up. All right, time starts now. I see our first poem. My name is Maru. I'm a dreamer. I believe in humanity and the magic of stories. Thank you, Maru. My name is Deborah. I'm known as La Profesora. I try to open doors and open minds. Beautiful, Deborah. Thank you. So I'm not going to be able to read all of these, obviously, but please keep them coming in the chat and please read the poem of your fellow attendees. Luis Andres, I do what I like with my discerning eye. I continue to try. Thank you, Luis. All right, so please keep those poems coming. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep the presentation moving, but I'm going to read all of these, trust me, once this workshop is over. And thank you for your willingness to write poems on the spot. I know everyone doesn't think of themselves as a creative or an artist or a poet, but just that willingness to take a risk and try is part of the creative spirit that we're going for in this session. All right, so what do creativity and the arts have to do with leadership? I was actually in a workshop earlier this week where I learned this statistic, and I thought for those of you who are like science and math people and want something to back all of this up, there was a recent study by the World Economic Forum. It's called the Future of Jobs Study, and they found of the employers that were surveyed, 73% of employers say creative thinking is the most in-demand skill in 2024. And so I'll also post a link in the chat to that Forbes article and the actual study. Creative thinking essentially is the ability to come up with unique, original, and innovative solutions. And we're going to explore a specific type of creative thinking called divergent thinking later in this presentation. But I want to ask this question, and if you have thoughts or ideas about this, please put them in the chat. Why do you think you need creative thinking skills? Why is this something employers value? How might it be an asset to you as a leader? What do people who think creatively, what are they doing? Any thoughts? Please put it in the chat. All right, creative thinking means you have an open mind. Thank you, Alan. Kim means you're a thinker, right? You're not just doing what you see. You can come up with better solutions, right? Or more innovative solutions than someone who is not open to thinking creatively. You can focus on the solution and not the problem. Thank you, Carla. So yeah, these are all great examples. And if you take a look at that article, it will tell you about it'll give some reasons, right? Like you're more adaptable as a creative thinker. I know AI is part of the conversation of our culture right now, but humans can think in ways computers don't because humans created the computer, right? So there's this, as Louise said in the chat, a wider range of thinking and thinking outside of the box. And so we're going to segue now, and I have a few quotes in this presentation. This first one is from Howard Thurman, who was a author, theologian, and philosopher. And he said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And this is one of those quotes that I come back to at different points in my life because I think there's a lot of truth to it. So we're going to spend a little bit of time right now thinking about what makes us come alive as individuals and how we can bring that to any setting we're in, right? Whether it's work or artistic or personal or professional. And so there is a book that I love called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. And in this book, he talks about 4 different zones that people can live their life in. So he names them the zone of incompetence. So you're doing something, you're not good at it, everybody else could do it better than you. The zone of competence, you're doing something, you're all right at it, but it's still not your strong suit, right? Then there's the zone of excellence. And this is where you're doing something and you're really great at it, but there's something about it that's not quite fulfilling you. And then there is the zone of genius, which is ultimately what he says we are all striving to attain, is to live and work and be in our zone of genius. So and there's a quote up here by Jay-Z, and I threw that in there because I saw him in concert years ago, and he said this, and I wrote it down. Actually, put it in a poem that's in my book. Everyone has genius level talent, and I think the thing that stood out to me about that quote was that I grew up in a time when genius was reserved for a select few people. So Albert Einstein was a genius, but the thought that any of us could be a genius seemed outrageous. And so, what I love about this approach that Gay Hendricks introduces us to, and that Jay Z also co signs on, is that each and every one of us is genius in some way. And how can we tap into that and use that? So, in the book, The Big Leap, Gay Hendricks describes your zone of genius as using your unique gifts, strengths, and talents to make a positive impact in a way that brings you a deep sense of joy and fulfillment. And that fulfillment could be financial, it could be emotional, it could be spiritual, right? But something that you feel like you were essentially born to do, right? Other people can do it, but the way you do it, right? There's something really special about that. And so I would love for us to spend just a few minutes thinking about what are our own genius level talents. And you can write your answers in your notebook. If you want to share them in the chat, you can, but you don't have to. The questions here are just some idea starters. What do you most love to do? What work do you do that doesn't seem like work? Like, I love writing. I love writing. And when I am in the zone, I can go for hours and it feels like no time has passed, right? Is there anything in your life that feels like that? Another question you might think about is, in your work, what produces the highest ratio of abundance and satisfaction to the amount of time spent? Like, as I mentioned, I was an engineer, but I don't love a spreadsheet. And if you if you ask me to work on a spreadsheet for hours, it's going to feel really excruciating to me. I am not going to feel an immense amount of satisfaction. So what brings you abundant, what makes you feel abundant and satisfied when it comes to work? And the last question, again, just as an idea starter, is what is your unique ability? Meaning, what is one of your greatest contributions to your organization or your family or the world? Um, when I first started working at Narrative 4, I actually started as the director of marketing and communications, and I had no professional background in that area, but I knew how to tell a story. And I thought, you know what? If you tell me the story you're trying to tell as an organization, I can help you tell that story across multiple platforms, right? Social media, newsletter, live events. And so I feel like storytelling is one of my unique abilities. So let's just take maybe 3 minutes in a notebook, on your laptop, in the chat. You don't have to answer all of these questions. You might choose one that you most resonate with, and you can take some time to answer that. So we'll take about 2 more minutes for these questions. And if you would like to share what you love to do the most or what your unique ability is in the chat, please feel free. And if you want to keep it to yourself, that is also fine. Thank you, Marianne. I see the work that produces the highest ratio of satisfaction and the amount of time I've spent in myself is whenever I get an A plus in my grades. It's completely satisfying and worth the effort. And Mariella, thank you. I thoroughly enjoy creating engaging and imaginative materials for my students. I take great pleasure in incorporating vibrant and fun elements to make the learning experience more dynamic and enjoyable. That's amazing. I would have loved you as a teacher. Ah, Mary Fur, bake a dessert, listen to music, make dessert very easy. I wish we could all get a taste of one of your desserts. Thank you. Ah, Carla, this is a great one. Making people feel heard, seen, valued, and safe. I think this is a great example because it doesn't have to be something tangible, right? Making people feel a certain way is absolutely something that can be part of your genius. Thank you all so much for these amazing responses. Please keep them coming in because, again, I'm going to read all of these when this is over. But in the interest of time, I will move on to the next slide. So now I want you to think of one specific thing you're going to do this week to nurture your genius. So if we think about our individual genius like a plant, it requires things to grow, right? Water, sunlight, maybe some vitamins in the soil. And so for me, I think sort of the things that are in my zone of genius are writing and teaching and performing. And so when I'm looking to nurture my genius, I might write in my journal, right? Just spending some time with my craft. Or I might go see a show at the theater or live music because I will be inspired and want to create because of somebody else's art. And so think about something that you can do for yourself this week that is going to help your genius grow. And again, you can share it in the chat or you can just write it in your notebook and keep it to yourself. But this will be sort of your promise to yourself this week to engage with your own genius. I want to shout out Sylvia, who said, my unique ability is being ordinary, not special in any way. I could be invisible, which I don't find annoying because it gives a great amount of freedom. There is beauty in the ordinary. I enjoy the small indulgences, the right coffee, being alone with the appropriate music and or right person. Thank you for sharing that, Sylvia. I would argue that everybody, like people are like snowflakes and we're all unique in some way, but I like that you claim being ordinary as your unique ability. All right, I see some responses coming in about how people are going to nurture their genius. Reflecting on what I do, setting better goals, becoming a better person every day. Thank you, Alan. making a list of things that I'm grateful for, things that help me be more connected and creative. Thank you, Deborah. Maru is going to read Todo lo que tienes. Now you're going to hear my terrible Spanish accent. Que saber sobre la vida, and try to start my own book. I cannot wait to read your book, Maru. Maru is actually one of my colleagues from Narrative 4, so I know and adore her. Carla is going to also, one of my colleagues from Narrative 4, is going to connect with loved ones who I haven't seen in a long time. All right. Thank you all so much. I hope you will remember these after the session is over and that you will actually do some of this, right? In honor of yourself and your own genius. So we're going to move on to sort of the last section of this presentation. We started talking about creative thinking, and I love this Pablo Picasso quote. He said, "Every child is an artist. The problem is staying an artist when you grow up." And I find this rings true for me because a lot of times I'm in workshops or classrooms where people are like, well, I'm not a poet, I'm not an artist, I'm not a writer. And what if we all are all of those things? We just have to hold on to them, right? From childhood. And this quote actually dovetails really nicely with this next slide. So there is a study done by, I think, the Royal Journal of Medicine. And in this study, they were looking at kindergarten children, and they measured that 98% of kindergarten children in the study were at a genius level in divergent thinking. And divergent thinking is just a specific type of creative thinking. They measured those same students 5 years later when they were 8 to 10 years old, and those who were at the genius level had dropped to 50%. And another 5 years after that, the number of divergent thinking geniuses had fallen even further, right? And so I have a picture here of Ken Robinson, Sir Ken Robinson. I believe he passed away, but he had a TED Talk that at some point was the most viewed TED Talk on the internet. And it was called Do Schools Kill Creativity? And he made the argument that our current education system privileges one solution, one answer to every question, right? And so students are just trying to get the question right. They're not actually encouraged to think creatively because it means their scores might go down. So I encourage you to take a look at that talk if you've never seen it. But just to give us all a common definition of divergent thinking, it is the ability to interpret a question in many different ways and the ability to see many different answers to a question. It's a creative process that involves generating innovative solutions to a problem by thinking outside of the box and seeing situations from radically new angles. And sometimes you will hear it called lateral thinking. And so in my brief Google research, there are 4 commonly held types of divergent thinking, but the divergent thinker in me thinks there are probably more, but like these are the ones that like most people talk about in terms of categories. So the first is fluency, the ability to develop large numbers of ideas in a short amount of time. The second one is flexibility, the ability to produce ideas from different viewpoints or in different categories. So if I was looking at a problem in my school, I might look at how administration would solve the problem. I might get ideas from teachers about how they solve the problem. And I might ask students and parents how they would solve the problem, right? So all those people would be coming at the same issue, but from different viewpoints. The third category is originality, and this is the ability to produce unique or innovative ideas. So the ideas that not everybody else is thinking about. And then elaboration. And this is the ability to expand on existing ideas and develop them further. So this is just an overview of different types of divergent thinking. But as a group, I would like us to try a few examples, right? And so this first one, here's the challenge. You have to get from Earth to the moon in one day, and you cannot use a spaceship. So, how are you going to get there? And for this example, we will use the strategy of fluency, meaning our goal in this moment is to come up with as many ideas as we can in a short amount of time. So I'm not even going to set a timer. I'm just going to say we've got a short amount of time. Think quick. What's your best idea from getting from the Earth to the moon in one day? Is it a ladder? It can't be a spaceship. So is it a flying car? I don't know. Easy, a giant catapult. Nice. And please put your thoughts in the chat. Hot air balloon, a bunch of hot air balloons lined up. Hopscotch the stars. Love it, Samantha. Thank you. A giant slingshot. Great idea. I will take 3 more examples before we move on to the next one. I also love questions like this, because I feel like it's great exercise for your brain. Like, I never have to think about this question on a daily basis. Victor suggests jumping really, really hard. Excellent. Luis says lasso the moon and bring it to Earth. That way we can just step onto it. Perfect. Maru, a giant trampoline. Amazing. All right, so that was us trying out the strategy of fluency with that question. Now we're going to move to another example. So here, the challenge is, how many uses can you find for a paperclip besides using it as a paperclip? So in divergent thinking, usually there are no wrong answers, but for the purpose of this question, the wrong answer is paperclip. Use it as a paperclip. So how might you use a paperclip? You could use it to clean your toenails, or maybe as a jungle gym for an ant, a toothpick. Excellent. So let's see how many ideas, innovative and unique ideas, we can come up with for this paper clip. A key. Nice. Pick a lock. That goes back to my love of crime procedurals. We could clip all these paper clips together and use it to lasso the moon. Perfect. You can use it to clip food in a bag. Awesome. Very practical. You can use it to make hearts. I actually Googled paperclip sculptures, and there are a number of artists who have created sculptures out of paperclips, which are pretty amazing. Earrings and a necklace. I love that. Paperclip jewelry. Any other thoughts about how we might use a paperclip besides using it as a paperclip? All right, so we have one more example, and all of these examples are sort of like fun things you can try, but we're also going to try to use our divergent thinking for a real practical example too. Make a giant paperclip statue. Awesome. Reset button. I have definitely used a paperclip to reset my wireless. All right, last example in our divergent thinking brain exercise sprint. The challenge is you have to build a city on the bottom of the ocean. What is your city made out of? Now we want this city to stay standing. So we're not going to make it out of sugar because that might melt, right? But other than that, I think a lot of different materials could work here. So here we're working with the divergent thinking strategy of elaboration, the ability to expand on existing ideas and develop them further. Oh, I see glass. I had not thought of that, but a glass city underwater would be pretty beautiful. Seashells and barnacles, using some of the material that already exists at the bottom of the sea. That's a great idea. I thought for a minute sponges, like kitchen sponges, and then I thought, oh, there are actually sponges in the sea. Maybe that could work. Any other thoughts? I'll give you all 1 minute. Tempered glass or titanium. Awesome. Air bubble technology and bioluminescent material. I don't know what air bubble technology is, but I'm imagining like giant human sized bubbles people can live in. I don't know if that's true. I'll just copy the Aztecs and build Mexico City again. Thank you, Ramiro. Bracelets. Ooh, that's gonna be interesting. A city made of bracelets. Maybe the paper clips are involved in that bracelet making. All right. Just waiting to see if there's one or two more before we move on. Concrete. That's a very strong material that will probably survive underwater. All right. So, our last group activity will be to think about a real problem, right? So, these examples are kind of made up. And I can share some links with you if you're interested in divergent thinking with like more activities you could do with students and things like that. But I actually think divergent thinking is a great tool to apply to a problem that you're currently facing, right? So I'd like you to think about one challenge you're facing, and it could be something personal, like I don't like the way my hairdresser cuts my hair, and I don't know how to tell her, right? That's a problem. Or it could be something professional. I'm not sure how to solve this particular issue at work, and I'd like to apply some divergent thinking to it. Or if you don't have anything personal or professional that you want to consider, you might think about something global, right? Right now, climate change is a big issue. Are there issues around the environment where you live? And for this purpose of this activity, do you want to focus on maybe one of those? Or it could be something that seems so big that you never think you might be able to solve it, meaning like how do we end war? How do we end racism, right? Like these are really big issues, and there are a lot of people already working on them. But I wonder if something might spark a new thought for you today around it, just based on some of the work that we've done together. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes. I want you to try to think of that divergent thinking strategy of fluency. How many different solutions can you come up to address the issue? Um, And usually, when I'm doing a writing class, I'll ask my students to keep their pens moving, meaning instead of stopping to think and taking time to pause and crossing out ideas because they won't work, I'll just say, just create, right? Like, just write down as many as you can. So, when we take this 5 minutes to make this list, I want you to try to do it without judgment, right? Don't think to yourself, well, I know this isn't going to work, so I won't do this one. Like, just put it on the page, see if it works. So, step one, think of a challenge you're facing, personal, professional, or global. Step two, make a list of as many different solutions as you can think of to address the issue. No judgment, no choosing one. You don't have to make a decision about any of this. It's just an exercise in letting your brain think divergently. So, I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes and then we will wrap up our session together. And Mary Ann, thank you for sharing your challenge. You can use this time to think about ways you can solve that. That's a tough one. And thank you. I see some folks are starting to share their challenges and solutions in the chat. So I encourage you to take a look at those if you're already done. We have 2 minutes, 2 more minutes for those of you who are currently still working. All right, wherever you are, you can come to a stopping place. Ramiro, your solution actually made me think about, I don't know if you all remember during the pandemic when humans, at least where I live, were on lockdown. Nature started coming back, right? Like wild animals started coming out of hiding, and streams that were polluted all of a sudden became clear. There is something to be said about the absence of people that is good for nature. I don't know. My thesis is there. All right, so this is officially the last activity that we're going to do together. I want to thank you all so much for your participation and your willingness to like jump in and try some things that might not be things that you would normally try. We haven't really talked about convergent thinking, which is sort of the parallel to divergent thinking. Convergent thinking is what we see like on the SAT test. We're all trying to get the same answer, or like a standardized test, right? Um, and so, one of the activities that I love that we did not do today, but I would encourage anyone to do, is to do the activity we just did, but in the opposite, meaning instead of thinking about solutions, think about how you can make the problem worse, right? And that is just a tactic in divergent thinking to spark new out of the box ideas, right? None of us want to make our problem worse, but the idea is if I think about a bunch of things to make it worse, it might get me closer to the thing that will make it better, or it might warn me about things to avoid. And so, my last question to you all is to think about how you might use divergent thinking in your personal, professional, or academic life. I actually did a version of this presentation with our leadership team, and we partnered up. Sorry, that's my timer going off. We partnered up and we asked our colleagues to come up with a list of solutions for the problem we were working on. And we compared it to our own list to try to find what we thought might be a great solution. Again, not with the idea of landing on one, but just understanding that having multiple brains brainstorming on the same issue might get us closer to something that we want to solve. And so, again, in your notebook, laptop, in the chat, some of you have already done this because this was related to whatever your problem was for the last activity, but just think about how you might use divergent thinking in your personal, professional, or academic life. Where might thinking out of the box serve you as a leader, as a student, or as an artist? And that will be sort of your take home question. And the last quote that I have for you is from the poet Maya Angelou. And she says, "You can't use up creativity. The more you have, the more you use, the more you have." And so I would just encourage you, no matter what field you're in, to find ways of infusing it with creativity in a way that feels organic to you and useful to the work that you're doing. And I want to thank you all for your time and attention and participation. And we're going to open it up for questions. So if you have any questions for me or anyone in the room, let us know.
Thank you so much, Felix, for that truly inspiring and thought provoking session. Your insights on leveraging creativity for leadership and meaningful change have given us so much to reflect on and take on forward in our lives and work. Now, we'd like to open the floor to questions from our audience. This is your chance to engage directly with Felice and dive deeper into the topics that resonated with you. If you're joining us on StreamYard, YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, please type your questions into the comment or chat section. We'll get through as many as the time we have allows. Let's keep the conversation going and remember to use the hashtags IEW UNE 2024 and hashtag UNE tu Potencial if you're sharing your thoughts or takeaways on social media. Alright, let's get started with our first question.
Thank you, Carla. I see the question. What do you consider is the relation of divergent thinking to curiosity? So, I mentioned at the top of the presentation the idea of inquiry, asking questions as part of my creative process. And I think as an artist, curiosity drives my work. I might see something or experience something and want to know more, and it's going to lead to the next thing. And so I think for me, the connection between divergent thinking and curiosity is there's a poet, Rilke, who wrote a book, Letters to a Young Poet, where he's actually responding to a young poet. And one of the things he says is live the questions, right? And I think divergent thinking is a space where we can sort of just like roll around and play and explore the question without feeling compelled to find one correct answer that's going to work for everyone. And that to me feels like the connection between curiosity and divergent thinking is like you're going to live the question, whatever it is, and let it take you to a resolution. Any other questions? So, as I mentioned, I'm a teacher, and one of the things they taught us in our teaching practicum was that we should be able to just sit in the awkward silence. But it's hard when you can't see anybody, and it's just you looking at yourself. Thanks, Alan. Thank you for coming. Oh, okay. Thank you all. I see some more questions. Luis, what would you recommend if our environment shuts down creative ideas? So I'm not going to name which job. Actually, I've had several jobs that shut down creative ideas, not narrative four. I will say that. Um, I think in my experience, it's about finding the person within that organization who is open to the idea. Um, I've been in work environments where I've had an idea or I've been asked to do something, and my direct supervisor is like, absolutely not. But her supervisor is like, that's a great idea. We should do that. Right. And I'm not suggesting going over people's heads in a way that will make your work life uncomfortable. But I think if you can find the people in your environment who are allies, right, who have bigger visions, who are interested in those types of larger and creative ideas, um, that's a great pathway. Another thing is you might not always find it in that environment, right? And so it might mean going outside of your workplace or outside of your classroom to find a community of people who are open to those ideas. Thanks so much for the question. Um, What advice can you give to someone new to leadership? I saw that. Uh, I would argue one of the most necessary traits for anyone in leadership is to listen, especially if you're new to leadership and if you're new to an environment. Um, the more information you can gather from the people who have been there or been in your position, I think that's a way to set yourself up for success. So, yeah, I would say listen more than you talk. What advice can you give us to speak so confidently? Um, so, as I mentioned, I come from the theater, and the theater is a lot of standing on stage and talking to people. And so, I used to be somebody who was incredibly anxious about speaking in front of crowds, but because of my work in my young adult life in the theater, I grew to love the stage. But I would say practice. Practice at home to anyone who will listen if you've got kids or a partner. um, I think if you can start with an audience of someone who you know loves you and is not judging you and only wants to see you win, that will sort of give you some of the practice that you need to maybe do it in front of harder rooms, right? Um, and I think part of the confidence in speaking in front of people is believing in what you're saying, right? So if something is really important to you, that passion is going to come across. And so, yeah, I think a belief in yourself and what you have to say, and that there's somebody who wants to listen, because I think that's true. Um, what was the first time you faced a challenge integrating creativity into your leadership, and how did you overcome it? Um, I don't know if this qualifies as leadership, but I'll use the example. I used to work with an instructional technology company that went into public schools to help teachers learn how to incorporate smart boards and laptops in the classroom. And we'd have this annual event that was a literacy event. And one year we had the former mayor of New York City as our guest speaker. And I thought, that's a big deal. And no one knows that this happened because we didn't have, I mean, this was years ago, so the internet wasn't what it is now, but we didn't have a blog or a newsletter or anything to really share this information with the general public. But I was like, people should know that this happened and that we did this. And so, because I'm a writer and I enjoy writing, I had gone to my direct supervisor and I was like, oh, like I would love to have like one day of the work week just to write about the work that we're doing so that we could put it on Facebook or our website or something. And my direct supervisor said no. And I was like, okay, cool, cool, cool. And then a week or two later, I was in a meeting with the executive director of the company. And I just like, kind of like offhandedly was like, you know, we're doing great work here and nobody knows about it. I think there's a way to solve that. And she gave me that day, one day a week to be able to do that. So I think that goes back to the earlier question, right? If somebody's not open to the idea, somebody else might be.
Okay, so we will be taking one last question. So if you want to choose.
Oh, okay. How about this one? Do you think that inspiration from others helped you achieve all your goals in life? Um, I think inspiration from others has definitely kept me going during rough times. I also think I've been very lucky to have like family and friends and even employers who have believed in me or seen something in me that I didn't. And so I wouldn't call that necessarily inspiration, but I think having a real support system, right? Like as a writer, I get rejected constantly. I send out things and they say no. And to keep going in the face of that, like you need people behind you that are like, you can do this, right? Don't let that get you down. And so I think that support has absolutely helped me achieve my goals in life.
Okay. So thank you to everyone who joined us for this insightful and engaging session of International Education Week UNE 2024. Thank you all for being such an engaged and thoughtful audience. A huge thank you once again to Felice Bell for her powerful insights and for leading us through such a meaningful session. We hope you found today's workshop inspiring and that it has sparked new ideas about the role creativity can play in leadership and in our everyday lives. This is just the beginning. We have an exciting lineup of talks and workshops ahead as part of our virtual conference. We invite you to join us for more sessions that continue to explore innovative ideas, global perspectives, and impactful ways to grow both personally and professionally. Make sure to check the schedule. And don't forget to share your experiences using the hashtags IEW UNE 2024 and hashtag UNETupotencial. Your engagement helps us create a vibrant and connected community. Thank you once again for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you in our upcoming sessions. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.